Drew Rosenhaus, the longtime agent of Antonio Brown, appeared on ESPN and had this to say.
I wouldn't be doing this interview if I didn't believe Antonio. These allegations are false. He denies every one of them. I am very confident that his legal team has facts that will prove this.
And before we came on the air, just as we were coming on there, Bill Belichick met with the media in New England and mentioned how both Antonio and his representatives have made statements, so I'm not going to be expanding on any of those, and he stayed pretty much true to his word there. However, this was the most, one would say, informationally laden exchange.
Are you preparing to have Antonio Brown at practice today?
Yes.
And are you preparing for him to play on Sunday?
We're taking it one day at a time, just like we always do.
Are you preparing for the possibility that he could be on the commissioner's
We're preparing for one day at a time.
Chris Brockman is our legal expert on the phone line right now.
Yes, he is.
Sports Illustrated legal analyst Michael McCann back here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing well, Rich, and yourself?
I'm hanging in there. Let's get right into it here. What decision does the NFL have to make right now, do you think?
They have to make a decision whether or not Brown is going to play on Sunday, and that pertains to whether or not Goodell wants to use the commissioner's exempt list in this situation where a player can be placed on administrative leave, he still gets paid, he still has access to his employment benefits, but he's basically separated from the team. The commissioner used this with Adrian Peterson back in 2014. Difference there was, of course, that he had been charged with a crime. Here, this is a civil lawsuit, and we know very little beyond the fact that there is a civil claim against Brown, and his attorney disputes it. So the league is in a hard position where a player is accused of a pretty serious offense, but the manner in which he's accused doesn't provide a lot of corroborating evidence or testimony that Goodell has to rely on.
Well, in that regard, then, the league can go and seek out the accuser, right? The question is, will the league be able to do that, get an interview, and get enough information to make a commissioner's exempt decision before Sunday? Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right. The league could reach out to the accuser and ask her to describe in her own words what happened. The league could then go back to Brown and say, you know, we have this claim, it's very serious, we need you to answer these questions. I think, though, it's going to be hard to pull that off this week. And I say that because, of course, we're already in the middle of the week. The accuser could have concerns about speaking with the NFL this early on in the process. She may want her attorney to be heavily involved. The attorney may want to regulate how that kind of interview takes place. There just isn't a lot of time between now and the Patriots playing the Dolphins on Sunday for all of that to happen. So my sense is the league is probably going to have to make a decision without that kind of information.
What about the texts, as her lawyer mentioned and also was in the legal papers that were filed in federal court yesterday? Direct messages is what they looked like to me when I saw them, or emails is what she's saying, from Antonio to her. Can those be corroborated immediately, and perhaps those alone put him on the exempt list, Michael?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess at that point, if Brown's lawyer says we dispute the reliability or authenticity of these messages, I don't think the league is going to have time to assess whether or not they're true, whether or not they've been altered in some way, whether or not some of the surrounding context of that exchange, like you said, it looks like a text or direct message, or whether it's an email, text, or whatever, it probably was part of a larger conversation. The league may want to see what that conversation was. Also, the league didn't punish Tyreek Hill after he made some pretty incendiary remarks to his former fiancée, and that didn't warrant going on the exempt list or being suspended. So there's some precedent that the league isn't acting alone on that kind of exchange.
Michael McCann of Sports Illustrated, legal expert, legal analyst, right here on the Rich Eisen Show. What to make out of the fact that it's a civil suit, Michael? What differences can you draw here that makes this unique?
Yeah, so not to claim it's not important, but it certainly minimizes the seriousness of it because of the fact that it's not based on a criminal complaint. There's no sworn testimony that this happened. The police haven't, as far as we know, investigated and reached any conclusions. A civil lawsuit in a worst-case scenario leads to the person who loses paying the other side money. It's not as grave of a matter as would be a criminal complaint. And I'm sure Brown's lawyer will argue that the absence of a criminal component to this makes the claim less reliable. And it puts Goodell in a position where he has to rely on a civil matter that normally wouldn't trigger that kind of, punishment. On the other hand, look, Ezekiel Elliott wasn't charged or convicted, and he was punished for 6 games. Goodell hasn't always used the criminal process as a floor to decide whether or not to punish someone. So it's really up to him. You're not always easy to predict. My instinct is that he's going to be patient with this. He's going to not rush to judgment because we know so little at this point.
Well, and I mentioned earlier in the show, I mean, the only, similar comparison we could see in the world of sports recently, Derrick Rose was the subject of a civil suit for sexual assault that was filed in August of 2015, and it took well over a year for the trial to take place and for him to be found not liable when it was all said and done. So this could take well over a year to play out. Michael, is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah, especially if Brown countersues what claims might happen. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen because that expands the scope of pretrial discovery, but this is not something that's going to get resolved overnight. It's not something that's going to get resolved this month unless they reach a deal at court, which can always happen. The lawyers can say, let's strike a deal, let's end this. But assuming that doesn't happen, this is going to take a while. This will take months. I don't want to say it's going to go through the entire season, but that wouldn't be surprising if that's the case. So I don't think Goodell is going to be able to rely on really a full scope of evidence and testimony. He's going to have to make a decision based on what he knows. And the NBA with Derrick Rose waited it out. Of course, he was found not liable in the civil case, and he wasn't charged with the crime. Maybe that happens here. We don't know.
And do you know about the lawyer for Antonio Brown who has made the statement on his behalf and put forth a vigorous denial yesterday? Darren Hytner, who's known on his own website as the go-to lawyer for trademark filings and disputes. He obviously has some sports clientele for legal advice. Is Antonio going to get a criminal lawyer for something like this? I understand it's a civil suit, but how to square all of this, Michael?
Yeah, so out of disclosure, I met Darren back when he was in law school. I think he invited me when he was a law student to go speak down in Florida, and I met him there, and he clearly has gone on to a successful career as a sports attorney. You're right, criminal law is a different field. At this point, I imagine he's going to say that this remains a civil matter, that it's not yet turned into a criminal issue, that if it does turn into a criminal issue, if the police start to investigate, if they start to ask questions, I imagine that a criminal defense attorney would be brought in because it's all separate field.
So just to sum up here, Michael, the Patriots have, for the lack of a better phrase, punted to the league office, which now has to decide, do we put Antonio Brown on the commissioner's exempt list? And if they do that, do they have to come up with terms on what needs to be met for him to be removed from that list? Is that how this all works before they make a decision on suspension?
They don't have to be as specific as specific terms. They have to tell him, they have to give him notice that he's being put on the list because the league has reasonable suspicion that he may have committed a violent act against another person. The exempt list doesn't require a criminal charge. It just requires the league comes to a belief that a player may have committed such an act. Now, it's supposedly supposed to be temporary and limited when a player is put on that list while the league investigates. But temporary and limited doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't say 4 games. It doesn't say 8 games. It doesn't say 1 game. It's really up to the discretion of the league. I think if the league does place him on it, they are going to try to keep it limited to a matter of weeks and try to conduct fact-finding. But this gets back to the fact that I don't know how much the league can do so quickly because they don't control the information. In the case of the accusations, the accuser and her attorneys controls the information, and they don't have to cooperate with the NFL either. It's not as if the NFL can compel anyone who is either the accuser or those around her to provide any information. The league only has contractual authority over ground.
Michael, really appreciate the time. It seems that these moments where your services are required on this show crop up a little bit more often these days. I appreciate the time.
You got it. Thanks for having me on, Rich.
You always. That's Michael McCann, at McCann Sports Law on Twitter from Sports Illustrated here on The Rich Eisen Show.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download The Rich Eisen Show app.